appreciation of the value and advantage of free government and the necessity of defending and maintaining it. And they enlisted, prepared to accept all the necessary labors, fatigues, exposures, dangers, and even death for the unity of our nation and the perpetuity of our institutions. I have found myself thinking often, especially since January 6th, of my great-great-grandfather and all those in every generation who have sacrificed so much for the unity of our nation and the perpetuity of our institutions. At the heart of our republic is the guarantee of the peaceful transfer of power. Members of Congress are reminded of this every day as we pass through the Capitol Rotunda. There, 8 magnificent paintings detail the earliest days of our republic. One, painted by John Trumbull, depicts the moment in 1793 when George Washington resigned his commission, handing control of the Continental Army back to Congress. Trumbull called this, quote, one of the highest moral lessons ever given the world. With this noble act, George Washington established the indispensable example of the peaceful transfer of power in our nation. Standing on the west front of the Capitol in 1981, President Ronald Reagan described it this way: the orderly transfer of authority as called for in the Constitution routinely takes place, as it has for almost 2 centuries, and few of us stop to think how unique we really are. In the eyes of many in the world, this every 4-year ceremony that we accept as normal is nothing less than a miracle. Every president in our history has defended this orderly transfer of authority, except one. January 6th, 2021 was the first time one American president refused his constitutional duty to transfer power peacefully to the next. In our work over the last 18 months, the Select Committee has recognized our obligation to do everything we can to ensure this never happens again. At the beginning of our investigation, we understood that tens of millions of Americans had been persuaded by President Trump that the 2020 election was stolen by overwhelming fraud. And we also knew this was flatly false. We knew that dozens of state and federal judges had addressed and resolved all manner of allegations about the election. Our legal system functioned as it should, but our president would not accept the outcome. Among the most shameful of this committee's findings was that President Trump sat in the dining room off the Oval Office, watching the violent riot at the Capitol on television. For hours, he would not issue a public statement instructing his supporters to disperse and leave the Capitol, despite urgent pleas from his White House staff and dozens of others to do so. Members of his family, his White House lawyers, virtually all those around him knew that this simple act was critical. For hours, he would not do it. During this time, law enforcement agents were attacked and seriously injured. The Capitol was invaded, the electoral count was halted, and the lives of those in the Capitol were put at risk. In addition to being unlawful, as described in our report, this was an utter moral failure and a clear dereliction of duty. Evidence of this can be seen in the testimony of President Trump's own White House counsel and several other White House witnesses. No man who would behave that way at that moment in time can ever serve in any position of authority in our nation again. He is unfit for any office. The committee recognizes that our work has only begun. It's only the initial step in addressing President Trump's effort to remain in office illegally. Prosecutors are considering the implications of the conduct described in our report, as are citizens all across our nation. In 1761, John Adams wrote, "The very ground of our liberty is freedom of elections. Faith in our elections and the rule of law is paramount to our republic. Election deniers, those who refuse to accept lawful election results, purposely attack the rule of law and the foundation of our country." The history of our time will show that the bravery of a handful of Americans doing their duty saved us from an even more grave constitutional crisis. Elected officials, election workers, and public servants stood against Donald Trump's corrupt pressure.
Yes.
Many of our committee's witnesses showed selfless patriotism, and their words and courage will be remembered. The brave men and women of the Capitol Police, the Metropolitan Police, and all the other law enforcement officers who fought to defend us that day saved lives and our democracy. Finally, I wish to thank my colleagues on this committee. It has been a tremendous honor to serve with all of you. We have accomplished great and important things together, and I hope we have set an example. And I also want to thank all of those who have honorably contributed to the work of our committee and to our report. We have accomplished much over a short period of time. Many of you sacrificed for the good of our nation. You have helped make history, and I hope helped to right the ship. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. As you know, this is our founding of our committee. Over the course of the last year and a half, we presented evidence in 10 public hearings, testimony from our brave law enforcement officers, senior White House and campaign officials, and many others. Today, we are prepared to share our findings with you. But before we do so, it's important to remember what we've learned, and critically, exactly what happened at the United States Capitol on January 6th. Without objection, I include in the record a video presentation of some of the key evidence our investigation has uncovered.
There were officers on the ground. They were bleeding. They were throwing up. I mean, I saw friends with blood all over their faces. I was slipping in people's blood.
As I was swarmed by a violent mob, they ripped off my badge. They grabbed and stripped me of my radio. They seized ammunition that was secured to my body. They began to beat me with their fists and with what felt like hard metal objects.
The key thing to do is to claim victory. No, we won. Fuck you. Sorry, over. We won. Yeah. You're wrong. Fuck you.
Right out of the box on election night, the president claimed that there was major fraud underway. I mean, this happened, as far as I could tell, before there was actually any potential of looking at evidence.
I didn't think what was happening was necessarily honest or professional at that point in time. So that led to me stepping away.
Generally discussed on that topic was whether the fraud, maladministration, abuse, or irregularities, if aggregated and read most favorably to the campaign, would that be outcome determinative? And I think everyone's assessment in the room, at least amongst the staff, Mark Short, myself, and Greg Jacob, was that it was not sufficient to be outcome determinative.
I told him that I did believe, yes, that once those legal processes were run, if fraud had not been established that had affected the outcome of the election, then unfortunately, I believe that what had to be done was concede the outcome.
What were the chances of President Trump winning the election?
After that point?
Yes.
None.
So what are we going to do here, folks? I only need 11,000 votes. Fellas, I need 11,000 votes. Give me a break.
The numbers are the numbers. The numbers don't lie. We had many allegations, and we investigated every single one of them.
Did one of them make a comment that they didn't have evidence, but they had a lot of theories?
That was Mr. Giuliani.
And what exactly did he say, and how did that come up?
My recollection, he said, we've got lots of theories, we just don't have the evidence. You're asking me to do something that's never been done in history, the history of the United States. And I'm going to put my state through that without sufficient proof
It's a tape earlier in the day of Ruby Freeman and Shay Freeman Moss and one other gentleman quite obviously surreptitiously passing around USB ports as if they're vials of heroin or cocaine.
In one of the videos we just watched, Mr. Giuliani accused you and your mother of passing some sort of USB drive to each other. What was your mom actually handing you on that video?
A ginger mint. Do you know how it feels to have the President of the United States to target you? The President of the United States is supposed to represent every American, not to target one.
I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bullshit.
He wanted to talk about that he thought the election had been stolen or was corrupt and that there was widespread fraud. And I had told him that our reviews had not shown that to be the case.
And I said something to the effect of, sir, we've done dozens of investigations, hundreds of interviews. The major allegations are not supported by the evidence developed.
Well, my first thought was, this is a terrible idea. Jeff Clark cannot be installed as acting Attorney General of the United States.
You ultimately told us that you described this meeting as not this meeting, the Georgia letter that was proposed as an effing murder-suicide pact. You remember using the term murder-suicide pact?
Yes.
Was it your impression that the vice president had directly conveyed his position on these issues to the president, not just to the world through a dear colleague letter, but directly to President Trump?
Many times.
My view is that the vice president didn't have the legal authority to do anything except what he did.
And I said, hold on a second, I want to understand what you're saying. You're saying that you believe the vice president, acting as president of the Senate, can be the sole decision maker as to, under your theory, who becomes the next president of the United States? And you said yes. And I said, are you out of your effing mind?
The president was, all the attention was on what Mike would do or what Mike wouldn't do.
There's a telephone conversation between the president and the vice president, is that correct?
Yes.
The conversation was pretty heated.
Apologize for being impolite, but do you remember what she said? Her father called him
The P word. It was clear that it was escalating and escalating quickly. So then when that tweet, the Mike Pence tweet, was sent out, I remember us saying that that was the last thing that needed to be tweeted at that moment. It felt like he was pouring gasoline on the fire by tweeting that.
They've gained access to the second floor, and I've got public about 5 feet from me down here below.
Okay, copy. They are on the second floor, moving in now. We may want to consider getting out and leaving now. Copy.
The members of the VP detail at this time were starting to fear for their own lives. There were calls to say goodbye to family members, so on and so forth.
Approximately 40 feet. That's all there was. 40 feet between the vice president and the mob.
Donald Trump and his allies and supporters are a clear and present danger to American democracy.
We got derogatory information from OSINT suggesting that some very violent individuals were organizing to come to D.C.
As Mr. Giuliani and I were walking to his vehicles that evening, he looked at me and said something to the effect of, Cass, are you excited for the 6th? It's going to be a great day. I remember looking at him and saying, Rudy, could you explain what's happening on the 6th? He had responded something to the effect of, we're going to the Capitol. It's going to be great. The president's going to be there. He's going to look powerful.
He personally asked for us to come to D.C. that day. And I thought, for everything he's done for us, if this is the only thing he's going to ask of me, I'll do it.
Well, basically, the president, got everybody riled up, told everybody to head on down. So we basically were just following what he said.
Within 15 minutes of leaving the stage, President Trump knew that the Capitol was besieged and under attack.
So are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Secretary of Defense that day?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Attorney General of the United States that day?
No.
Are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Secretary of Homeland Security that day?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Did you ever hear the the President
No.
ask for the National Guard? Did you ever hear the President ask for law enforcement response?
No.
You got an assault going on the Capitol of the United States of America. And there's nothing. No call, nothing, zero.
I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung. And Mark had responded something to the effect of, you heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong.
You on the staff did not want people to leave the Capitol.
On the staff?
In the White House.
I can't think of anybody, on that day who didn't want people to get out of the Capitol particularly once the violence started. No. I mean,
What about the president?
Yeah.
well, she said the staff. So I answered.
No, I said in the White House.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I thought you said who else on the staff. I can't reveal communications, but obviously I think,
I said, good, John. Now I'm going to give you the best free legal advice you're ever getting in your life. Get a great effing criminal defense lawyer. You're going to need it.
General Flynn, do you believe in the peaceful transition of power in the United States of America?
Michael Flynn still doesn't believe in the peaceful transition of power.
The turret. What turret?
I don't want to say the election's over. I just want to say Congress has certified the results without saying the election's over, okay?
He doesn't want to say it. Okay, Molly, the video's
The
over.
chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over the last 18 months, the Select Committee has conducted a congressional investigation of enormous scale, seeking to uncover the depth and breadth of ex-President Trump's multi-part plan to reverse the lawful outcome of the 2020 presidential election. We've compiled an immense volume of documents collected from countless individuals, law enforcement agencies, federal and state authorities. Many of our efforts to get the evidence required litigation in federal court, including the U.S. Supreme Court. We've taken the testimony of hundreds of witnesses. And while we couldn't show them all during the hearings, we focused on those who were most central, including our ex-president's White House aides, his senior Department of Justice officials, and senior members of his campaign. Based on this assembled evidence, the Select Committee has reached a series of specific findings. Now, many of these findings pertain to what has been called the big lie, the enormous effort led by ex-President Trump to to spread baseless accusations and misinformation in an attempt to falsely convince tens of millions of Americans that the election had been stolen from him. Beginning even before the election and continuing through January 6th and thereafter, Donald Trump purposely disseminated false allegations of fraud in order to aid his effort to overturn the 2020 election. Ex-President Trump's decision to declare victory falsely on election night wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was premeditated. The committee has evidence that ex-President Trump planned to declare victory and unlawfully to call for the vote counting to stop, and that he told numerous allies about his intent in the weeks before the election. The committee found that Mr. Trump raised hundreds of millions of dollars with false representations made to his online donors. The proceeds from his fundraising, we have learned, have been used in ways that we believe are concerning. In particular, the committee has learned that some of those funds were used to hire lawyers. We've also had evidence of efforts to provide or offer employment to witnesses. For example, one lawyer told a witness the witness could, in certain circumstances, tell the committee that she didn't recall facts when she actually did recall them. That lawyer also did not disclose who was paying for the lawyer's representation, despite questions from the client seeking that information. He told her, quote, "We're not telling people where funding is coming from right now." We've learned that a client was offered potential employment that would make her, quote, "financially very comfortable" as the date of her testimony approached by entities that were apparently linked to Donald Trump and his associates. These offers were withdrawn or didn't materialize as reports of the content of her testimony circulated. The witness believed this was an effort to affect testimony, and we are concerned that these efforts may have been a strategy to prevent the committee from finding the truth. Throughout the post-election period, ex-President Trump was told repeatedly by his campaign advisors, government officials, and others there was no evidence to support his claims of election fraud. Even since our last hearing, the Select Committee has obtained testimony from new witnesses who've come forward to tell us about their conversations with ex-President Trump on this topic. Here is one of his senior advisors, Hope Hicks.
Seeing evidence of fraud on a scale that would have impacted the outcome of the election. And I was becoming increasingly concerned that we were damaging his legacy.
What did the president say in response to what you just described?
He said something along the lines of, nobody will care about my legacy if I lose. So that won't matter. The only thing that matters is winning.
Despite all that, he continued to purposely and maliciously make false claims, sometimes within a day of being told that a particular claim was false and unsupported by the evidence. By the time the Electoral College met to cast its votes on December 14th, 2020, a number of President Trump's senior staff, cabinet officials, and members of his family were urging him to facilitate a peaceful transition to the incoming administration. He disregarded their advice, and he continued to claim publicly that the election had been stolen from him. Numerous state courts and rejected the Trump campaign's claims of voter fraud, including 11 judges appointed by ex-President Trump himself. Many of these courts issued scathing opinions, criticizing the lack of evidence that ex-President Trump and his allies had advanced to support their claims. Numerous individuals associated with these efforts have since acknowledged that they were unable to find sufficient evidence of fraud to affect the election results, including in testimony to this select committee. Still, ex-President Trump repeated those false claims and tried to convince his supporters the election was stolen. This was an attempt to justify overturning lawful election results. Donald Trump knowingly and corruptly repeated election frauds, which incited his supporters to violence on January 6th. He continues to repeat meritless claim that the election was stolen even today and continues to erode our most cherished and shared belief in free and fair elections. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Building on his constant repetition of the big lie, President Trump engaged in an unprecedented effort to obstruct the joint session on the proceeding where his electoral loss would be certified by Congress. This effort began in part in the states, which hold, count, and ultimately determine the winners of presidential elections. Many state officials were targeted by President Trump and his campaign. The local election workers he accused baselessly of election fraud, the state officials he pressured to stop the count or to find votes that didn't exist, and the state legislative officials he urged to disregard the popular will of the voters and their oath of office in order to name him the winner instead. Here are the Select Committee findings about President Trump's state pressure campaign. President Trump and his enablers repeatedly pressured state officials to take action to overturn the results of the election. The most dramatic example of this campaign of coercion was the president's January 2nd, 2021 call to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, in which the president urged the secretary to find 11,780 votes he needed to change the outcome in that state. During that call, President Trump again repeated conspiracy theories about the election that his own appointees at the Department of Justice had already debunked. Trump also made what Secretary Raffensperger apparently considered a threat, accurately considered a threat, suggesting that Raffensperger and his attorney, that they could be subject to criminal prosecution if they didn't follow through with his demands. Then, in telephone calls and in-person meetings, Donald Trump pressured state elections officials and state legislators to alter official election results. But courageous public servants, including Republicans like Rusty Bowers, held firm and refused to put Donald Trump over their oath to the Constitution. When Donald Trump's pressure campaign did not achieve the results he wanted, he oversaw an effort to obtain and transmit false electoral college ballots to Congress and the National Archives. The false ballots were created by fake Republican electors on December 14th. At the same time, the actual certified electors in those states were meeting to cast their votes for President Biden. By that point in time, election-related litigation was over in all or nearly all of these states. And Trump campaign election lawyers realized that the fake slates were unjustifiable on any grounds and may be unlawful. In spite of these concerns and the concerns of individuals in the White House counsel's office, President Trump and others proceeded with this plan. The Select Committee has developed evidence that these intentionally false documents were transmitted to multiple officers of the federal government and were intended to interfere with the proper conduct of the joint session, where the existence of so-called competing slates of electors would serve as a pretext for legitimate electoral votes to be rejected. President Trump repeatedly attacked state and local officials who refused to do his bidding, as well as local elections workers who he baselessly accused of fraud. As Ruby Freeman and the testimony of other elections officials so powerfully demonstrated, the people who drew President Trump's ire or were the subject of his lies faced real-world consequences, including public harassment and death threats. Some of these elections workers and officials have been forced to leave their homes. Others have been forced to leave the jobs they loved. Take a listen to Ms. Freeman's story.
Now I won't even introduce myself by my name anymore. I get nervous when I bump into someone I know in the grocery store who says my name. I'm worried about who's listening. I get nervous when I have to give my name for food orders. I'm always concerned of who's around me. I've lost my name and I've lost my reputation.
The treatment of Ms. Freeman and her daughter Shay Moss and so many others around the country was callous, inhuman, inexcusable, and dangerous. And those responsible should be held accountable. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Kinzinger, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly one of the many important components of our federal government is the Department of Justice. It's the body that it's responsible for enforcing our laws and investigating criminal doing. For this reason, it's of the utmost importance that our Department of Justice operates as a fair and neutral body that enforces our federal laws without fear or without favor. It is this critical function that President Trump sought to corrupt, as he sought to use the Department of Justice to investigate and prosecute purported election fraud and to help him convince the public that the election was stolen. The Select Committee has made the following findings with respect to the Department of Justice. In the weeks immediately following the 2020 election, Attorney General Bill Barr advised President Trump that the Department of Justice had not seen any evidence to support Trump's theory that the election was stolen by fraud. No evidence. Over the course of the 3 meetings in this post-election period, Attorney General Barr assured President Trump that the Justice Department was properly investigating claims of election fraud. He debunked numerous election fraud claims, many of which the president would then go on to repeat publicly. And he made clear that President Trump was doing, quote, a great disservice to the country by pursuing them. After Attorney General Barr's resignation, President Trump requested that the acting leadership of the department, Jeffrey Rosen and Richard Donahue, quote, just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. In other words, just tell a small lie to put the facade of legitimacy on this lie, and the Republican congressman and I can distort and destroy and create doubt all ourselves. Between December 23rd and January 3rd, President Trump called or met with them nearly every day and was told repeatedly the department investigation showed no factual support for Trump's fraud allegations. Mr. Rosen and Mr. Donahue told him that the fraud claims were simply untrue. As Mr. Rosen and Mr. Donahue continued to resist, President Trump then tried to install a loyalist named Jeffrey Clark to lead the department as acting attorney general. On several occasions, Clark met with the president, apparently along with Representative Scott Perry, without authorization, promising to take the actions that Barr, Rosen, and Donahue had refused to take. In particular, Mr. Clark intended to send a letter that he had drafted with the help of a political appointee that the White House installed at DOJ with just weeks left in the administration. Mr. Clark intended to send the letter to officials in numerous states, informing them falsely, of course, that the department had identified significant concerns about the election results in their state and encouraging their state legislatures to come into special session to consider appointing Trump rather than Biden electors. Here's Acting Deputy Attorney General Donahue describing his reaction to Mr. Clark's proposed letter.
Some drafting letters without the knowledge of what the department had actually done in terms of investigations, that he was being reckless. And I recall toward the end saying, what you're proposing is nothing less than the United States Justice Department meddling in the outcome of a presidential election.
Knowing that existing department leadership would not support his false election claims, President Trump offered Mr. Clark the job of acting attorney general. In a dramatic January 3rd meeting in the Oval Office, Rosen, Donahue, White House counsel Pat Cipollone, and White House lawyer Eric Hirschman strongly objected to the appointment of Jeffrey Clark as acting attorney general. Mr. Clark pleaded his case and offered to send the letter that he had drafted. The White House counsel called the Clark letter, quote, a murder-suicide pact. Numerous White House and Department of Justice lawyers all threatened to resign if Mr. Clark was appointed. Donald Trump would be leading a graveyard. It was only after the threat of mass resignations that President Trump rescinded his offer to Mr. Clark. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Aguilar, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Former President Trump's multi-part plan didn't stop with the states or with the Department of Justice. It touched nearly every component of our federal system, ranging from the courts to Congress to his own Vice President, Mike Pence. In the weeks before January 6th, Mr. Trump turned to the man who had served him loyally for 4 years. He embraced an illegal scheme proposed by John Eastman and others who concocted an unfounded legal theory that the vice president could reject Joe Biden's electoral votes during the joint session. When Vice President Pence and many others, including Trump's own lawyer, John Eastman, told him correctly that former President Trump spearheaded an unprecedented campaign to coerce him to do it anyway, ultimately culminating in a dangerous threat to Mr. Pence's life on January 6th. These are the Select Committee's findings with respect to the pressure campaign against the Vice President. John Eastman admitted in advance of the 2020 election that Mike Pence could not lawfully refuse to count official electoral votes. But he nevertheless devised a meritless proposal that deployed a combination of bogus election fraud claims and the fake electoral ballots to say that Mike Pence, presiding over the joint session, could reject legitimate electoral votes for President-elect Biden. But still, President Trump accepted and repeated Eastman's theory and used it to pressure the vice president to take unlawful action. In multiple heated conversations, President Trump directly pressured Vice President Pence to adopt the Eastman theory and either reject the electors or send them back to the state legislatures. The vice president consistently resisted and repeatedly told the president that he did not possess the authority to do what President Trump directed. This culminated in an angry phone call on the morning of January 6th between President Trump and Vice President Pence, during which the former president repeatedly berated Mr. Pence by cursing and leveling threats. White House staffer Nick Luna was one of the many witnesses who heard the call as it happened. Take a listen at Mr. Luna's testimony.
Did you hear any part of the phone call, even if just the end that the president was speaking from?
I did, yes.
All right, and what'd you hear?
So as I was dropping off the note, my memory, I remember hearing the word wimp. Either he called him a wimp. I don't remember if he said, you are a wimp, you'll be a wimp. Wimp is the word I remember. Something to the effect, the wording's wrong. I made the wrong decision 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah. Emotional
In the face
manipulation.
of the vice president's resistance, the former president and others exerted both private and public pressure to change his mind. In his speech on the Ellipse on the afternoon of January 6th, former President Trump told the crowd that Vice President Pence needed the courage to do what he has to do. Once the riot began, President Trump deliberately chose to issue a tweet attacking Mr. Pence, knowing that the crowd had already grown violent. Almost immediately thereafter, the crowd around the Capitol surged, and between 2:30 and 2:35 p.m., the Metropolitan Police line on the west front of the Capitol broke. This was the first time in MPD history that a line like this had broken. Rioters at the Capitol were heard chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," through the afternoon. As a result of this unrest, Vice President Pence was forced to flee to a secure location where he actively coordinated with law enforcement and other governmental officials to address the ongoing violence. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Murphy, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ultimately, President Trump did not succeed in bending state and federal officials to his will. At every turn, state officials, the Department of Justice, Mike Pence, and many others stood up for the rule of law and resisted the president's wishes. In that way, our American institutions held after the 2020 election. But that did not stop President Trump. Instead, he turned to his supporters, those who believed his lies about a stolen election. He summoned a crowd to the nation's capital on January 6, hoping that they would pressure Congress to do what he could not do on his own. The Select Committee has made the following findings on this issue. 2 years ago today, in the early morning hours of December 19th, Donald Trump sent a tweet urging his supporters to travel to Washington for a protest on January 6. "Be there, we'll be wild," he tweeted. Between December 19th and January 6th, the president repeatedly encouraged his supporters to come to Washington. The president's December 19th tweet galvanized domestic violent extremists, including members of the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, and organized militia groups. These individuals began organizing to come to the Capitol in large numbers with the specific intent to use violence to disrupt the certification of the election during the joint session. Prior to January 6th, the FBI, Secret Service, U.S. Capitol Police, D.C. government, and other law enforcement agencies gathered substantial evidence suggesting the risk of violence at the Capitol during the joint session. These included warnings like the following. Their plan is to literally kill people. Please, please take this tip seriously and investigate further. President Trump supporters have proposed a movement to occupy Capitol Hill. Alert regarding the VP being a dead man walking if he doesn't do the right thing. I saw several other alerts saying they will storm the Capitol if he doesn't do the right thing. In the days leading up to January 6th, President Trump's advisors explicitly told him that he should encourage his supporters to be peaceful that day, but he refused. One witness, Hope Hicks, provided the committee with records of her text messages on January 6th. In one exchange with another staffer, he texted her, "Hey, I know you're seeing this, but he," referring to President Trump, "really should tweet something about being nonviolent." "I'm not there," Hicks replied. "I suggested it several times Monday and Tuesday, and he refused." When Ms. Hicks came in to provide testimony to the committee, we asked her about this exchange. Her explanation is that the "he" in this text wasn't the president, but rather it was Eric Hirschman. Take a listen to her testimony.
When you wrote, "I suggested it several times," and it presumably means that the president say something about being nonviolent. You wrote, "I suggested it several times Monday and Tuesday, and he refused." Tell us what happened.
Sure.
Yes,
I didn't speak to the president about this directly, but I communicated people like Eric Hirschman that it was my view that it was important that the president put out some kind of message in advance of the event.
And what was Mr. Hirschman's response?
Mr. Hirschman said that he had made the same, recommendation directly to the president, and that he had refused.
Just so I understand, Mr. Hirschman said that he had already recommended to the president that the president convey a message that people should be peaceful on January 6th, and the president had refused to do that?
Yes.
The public will be able to review this in the transcripts and see the perspective Eric Hirschman gave before we took Hope Hicks's testimony. Despite having knowledge of the threats of violence presented by the crowd gathered on January 6th, President Trump gave an incendiary speech, declaring without basis that the election had been stolen and encouraging his supporters to fight like hell. And during the speech and immediately thereafter, President Trump stated his intention to travel to the Capitol with his supporters in an effort to influence the joint session. The Select Committee has developed evidence indicating that President Trump did, in fact, intend to go to the Capitol on the afternoon of January 6th, and that he repeatedly expressed that intention during the afternoon and in the days prior. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Virginia, Mrs. Luria for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All of President Trump's efforts came to a head on the afternoon of January 6th. Standing on the stage of the Ellipse, President Trump told tens of thousands of angry supporters that the election was stolen, that they had the power to change that if they marched to the Capitol, and that they wouldn't have a country anymore if the presidency was taken away from him. He told them he would be there with them. And then, as the crowd descended on the Capitol, President Trump watched it on television. Despite pleas from his senior advisors, from lawmakers on the Hill, and from his own children, President Trump would not issue a public statement, instructing his supporters to disperse and leave the Capitol. Mr. Trump's failures spanned the period from 1:10 p.m., when his speech ended, and he instructed his supporters to march to the Capitol, to 4:17 p.m., when he finally, begrudgingly, told his supporters to go home. For 187 minutes, he actively disregarded his constitutional obligation to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. As we've established through months of investigation, that is because the mob wanted what President Trump wanted, to impede the peaceful transition of power. These are the Select Committee's findings about President Trump's dereliction of duty. From the outset of the violence, and for several hours that followed, people at the Capitol, people inside President Trump's administration, elected officials of both parties, members of President Trump's own family, and even Fox News commentators who were sympathetic to President Trump, all tried to contact the White House to urge him to do one singular thing, the one thing that all of these people immediately understood was required: instruct his supporters to leave the Capitol. The president repeatedly refused pleas as he watched the violence at the Capitol on television. During the day, the president never spoke with National Guard, the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, or any law enforcement agency. At no point during the day, or any other, did he issue any order to deploy any law enforcement agency to assist. Multiple witnesses, including President Trump's White House counsel, testified to these facts. Your White House employees, who had been speaking directly with President Trump, state that he didn't want anything done. The president was making phone calls that afternoon, but they weren't to law enforcement officials. Rather, President Trump continued to call his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. Both President Trump and Mr. Giuliani spoke with congressional leaders, even after the violence had begun, to encourage them to continue delaying the session. Approximately 3 hours after being informed of the violence at the Capitol, hours during which, as our evidence has shown, Donald Trump sat in his dining room and watched the violence on television, the president released a video statement in which he again repeated that the election was stolen, told his supporters at the Capitol that he loved them, and ultimately suggested that they disperse. The statement had an immediate impact on elements of the crowd, many of whom have testified that it led them to depart the Capitol. At 6:01 p.m., President Trump, his last tweet of the day, he did not condemn the violence. Instead, he attempted to justify it. These are the things and events that happen when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously and viciously stripped away, he wrote. Remember this day forever. There's no doubt that President Trump thought that the actions of the rioters were justified. In the days after January 6th, he spoke to several different advisors. And in those conversations, he minimized the seriousness of the attack. Here's new testimony from another one of President Senior's advisors, Kellyanne Conway.
You said you talked to the president the next day. Tell us about that conversation on the 7th.
Yeah, I don't think it was very long. I just said that was just a terrible day. I'm working on a long statement. I said it's crazy.
What did he say?
No, these people are upset. They're very upset.
In the days following the attack, President Trump also expressed a desire to pardon those involved in the attack. Since then, he's suggested that he will do so if he returns to the Oval Office. In summary, President Trump lit the flame, He poured gasoline on the fire and sat by in the White House dining room for hours watching the fire burn. And today, he still continues to fan those flames. That was his extreme dereliction of duty. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you for your extraordinary leadership of this committee. Generations to come will praise you and the Vice Chair for your unswerving devotion to the rule of law. Several months ago, you tasked several of our members in a subcommittee with bringing recommendations to the full committee about potential referrals to the Department of Justice and other authorities based on evidence of criminal and civil offenses that has come to our attention over the course of our investigation. We are now prepared to share those recommendations today. Mr. Chairman, let me begin with some relevant background considerations to our criminal referrals. The dangerous assault on American constitutional democracy that took place on January 6, 2021 consists of hundreds of individual criminal offenses. Most such crimes are already being prosecuted by the Department of Justice. The committee advancing referrals where the gravity of the specific offense, the severity of its actual harm, and the centrality of the offender to the overall design of the unlawful scheme to overthrow the election compel us to speak. Ours is not a system of justice where foot soldiers go to jail and the masterminds and ringleaders get a free pass. Mr. Chairman, as you know, our committee had the opportunity last spring to present much of our evidence to a federal judge, something that distinguishes our investigation from any other congressional investigation I can recall. In the context of resolving evidentiary privilege issues related to the crime fraud doctrine in the Eastman case, U.S. District Court Judge David Carter examined just a small subset of our evidence to determine whether it showed the likely commission of a federal offense. The judge concluded that both former President Donald Trump and John Eastman likely violated 2 federal criminal statutes. This is the starting point for our analysis today. The first criminal statute we invoke for referral, therefore, is Title 18, Section 1512C, which makes it unlawful for anyone to corruptly obstruct, influence, or impede any official proceeding of the United States government. We believe that the evidence described by my colleagues today and assembled throughout our hearings warrants a criminal referral of former President Donald J. Trump, John Eastman, and others for violations of this statute. The whole purpose and obvious effect of Trump's scheme were to obstruct, influence, and impede this official proceeding, the central moment for the lawful transfer of power in the United States. Second, we believe that there is more than sufficient evidence to refer former President Donald J. Trump, John Eastman, and others for violating Title 18, Section 371. This statute makes it a crime to conspire to defraud the United States. In other words, to make an agreement to impair, obstruct, or defeat the lawful functions of the United States government by deceitful or dishonest means. Former President Trump did not engage in a plan to defraud the United States acting alone. He entered into agreements, formal and informal, with several other individuals who assisted him with his criminal objectives. Our report describes in detail the actions of numerous co-conspirators who agreed with and participated in Trump's plan to impair, obstruct, and defeat the certification of President Biden's electoral victory. That said, the subcommittee does not attempt to determine all of the potential participants in this conspiracy, as our understanding of the role of many individuals may be incomplete even today because they refuse to answer our questions. We trust that the Department of Justice will be able to form a far more complete picture through its own investigation. Third, We make a referral based on Title 18, Section 1001, which makes it unlawful to knowingly and willfully make materially false statements to the federal government. The evidence clearly suggests that President Trump conspired with others to submit slates of fake electors to Congress and the National Archives. We believe that this evidence we set forth in our report is more than sufficient for a criminal referral of former President Donald J. Trump and others in connection with this offense. As before, we don't try to determine all of the participants in this conspiracy, many of whom refuse to answer our questions while under oath. We trust that the Department of Justice will be able to form a more complete picture through its own investigation. The fourth and final statute we invoke for referral is Title 18, Section 2383. The statute applies to anyone who incites, assists, or engages in insurrection against the United States of America, and anyone who gives aid or comfort to an insurrection. An insurrection is a rebellion against the authority of the United States. It is a grave federal offense anchored in the Constitution itself, which repeatedly opposes insurrections and domestic violence, and indeed uses participation in insurrection by office holders as automatic grounds for disqualification from ever holding public office again at the federal or state level. Anyone who incites others to engage in rebelling, assists them in doing so, or gives aid and comfort to those engaged in insurrection is guilty of a federal crime. The committee believes that more than sufficient evidence exists for a criminal referral of former President Trump for assisting or aiding and comforting those at the Capitol who engaged in a violent attack on the United States. The committee has developed significant evidence that President Trump intended to disrupt the peaceful transition of power under our Constitution. The president has an affirmative and primary constitutional duty to act to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Nothing could be a greater betrayal of this duty than to assist in insurrection against the constitutional order. The complete factual basis for this referral is set forth in detail throughout our report. These are not the only statutes that are potentially relevant to President Trump's conduct related to the 2020 election. Depending on evidence developed by the Department of Justice, the president's actions could certainly trigger other criminal violations. Nor are President Trump and his immediate team the only people identified for referrals in our report. As part of our investigation, we asked multiple members of Congress to speak with us about issues critical to our understanding of this attack on the 2020 election and our system of constitutional democracy. None agreed to provide that essential information. As a result, we took the significant step of issuing them subpoenas based on the volume of information particular members possessed about one or more parts of President Trump's plans to overturn the election. None of the subpoenaed members complied, and we are now referring 4 members of Congress for appropriate sanction by the House Ethics Committee for failure to comply with lawful subpoenas. Mr. Chairman, we understand the gravity of each and every referral we are making today, just as we understand the magnitude of the crime against democracy that we describe in our report. But we have gone where the facts and the law lead us, and inescapably, they lead us here. Accordingly, Mr. Chairman, in light of these facts, I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be directed to transmit to the United States Department of Justice relevant select committee records in furtherance of these criminal referrals.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Pursuant to notice, I now call up Select Committee's final report pursuant to Section 4A of House Resolution 503. The clerk shall designate the report.
Final report of the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol.
Without objection, the report will be considered read and open to amendment at this point. I now recognize the gentlewoman from Virginia, Ms. Luria, for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee favorably report to the House the Select Committee's final report, which includes the committee's legislative recommendations and criminal referrals of Donald J. Trump and others, pursuant to Section 4A of House Resolution 503.
The question is on the motion to favorably report to the House. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Cheney?
Aye.
Ms. Cheney, aye. Ms. Lofgren?
Aye.
Ms. Lofgren, aye. Mr. Schiff?
Aye.
Mr. Schiff, aye. Mr. Aguilar?
Aye.
Mr. Aguilar, aye. Mrs. Murphy?
Aye.
Mrs. Murphy, aye. Mr. Raskin?
Aye.
Mr. Raskin, aye. Mrs. Luria?
Aye.
Mrs. Luria, aye. Mr. Kinzinger?
Kinzinger, aye.
Mr. Kinzinger, aye.
How is the chair recorded?
Mr. Chairman, you are not recorded.
Chair votes aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
The clerk will report the vote.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, there are 9 ayes and 0 noes.
The motion is agreed to. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Without objection, staff is authorized to make any necessary technical or conforming changes to the report to reflect the actions of the committee. The chair requests those in the hearing room remain seated until the Capitol Police have escorted members from the room. There being no further business, without objection, the Select Committee stands adjourned.
And with that, the chairman of this Select Committee, Ms. Benny Thompson, gavels this committee to a close, presumably its last public meeting, where it just in the last few moments has taken a historic vote, and is to refer to the Department of Justice a number of criminal referrals, 4 criminal referrals against the former president of the United States, Donald Trump. You can see now the members of the committee leaving the room, shaking some hands. That's Chairman Thompson, followed by California Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, and then the other members of the committee. Historic in that a former president is being referred because of these criminal actions, and also because of the solemn nature of what we have just witnessed. And after 18 months of extensive research, compiling of records, interviewing with hundreds of witnesses, this today is the result. I'm joined again by, once again, Mary McCord, a former Justice Department official, and Jamil Jaffer, who served as Associate Counsel for President George W. Bush. Jamil Jaffer, as someone who worked for a president, former President Bush, as we said, this is historic.
It absolutely is historic. I mean, the idea of a committee of the House voting
We'll just hear what they
to
say for a
recommend
minute.
criminal charges against a former president of the United States for activities he conducted while president, and many other and a number of others to the Justice Department is, shocking, as were the events of that day. And so, in some ways, not surprising. I think that we knew those who watched the events of that day.
I was slightly thinking that we could do a song. When I say we, I mean I could do a song, the We'll Be Back song. But I was also thinking it would have been good if I had changed the lyrics to You'll Be Back, to sing it as if it was Trump inciting violence at the Capitol by saying manipulative things. Oh, well. What I'm going to do is put it on in the background and sing along a little bit. You'll Be Back, which, yes, is late, but should be good. I haven't sung it for a while. say the price of my love's not a price that you're willing to pay. You cry in your tea, which you hurl in the sea when you see me go by. Why so sad? Remember we made an arrangement when you away. Now you're making me mad. Remember, despite our estrangement, I'm your man. You'll be back, soon you'll see. You'll remember you belong to me. You'll be back, time will tell. You'll remember that I served you well. Oceans rise, empires fall. We have seen each other through it all. And when push comes to shove, I will send a fully armed battalion to remind you of my love. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. You say our love is draining and you can't go on. You'll be the one complaining when I am gone. No, don't change the subject, 'cause you're my favorite subject, my sweet, submissive subject, my loyal, royal subject, forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. You back like before. I will fight the fight and win the war for your love, for your praise, and I'll love you till my dying days. When you're gone, I'll go mad, so don't throw away this thing we had. When push comes to shove, I will kill your friends and family to remind you of my love. Da 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 da. Da 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 Well, I should have practiced that, but that was in celebration of the possibly final ever appearance of the January 6th committee. The final report, their recommendation for criminal charges for Donald Trump on 4 counts: conspiracy to make a false statement and statute 182383 involving inciting, assisting, aiding or comforting an insurrection. So it's a good step forward for the United States. There's always a slightly chilling effect, which is we know Trump is able to encourage his supporters to contemplate violence. He is able to promote hate. And I saw a meme the other day that said, when you hate someone, everything they do becomes insufferable. And then it had that bee, look at that bee eating crackers like she owns the place. I.e., if you hate someone, it's intolerable to see them even eating crackers, and you are primed to ascribe an insufferable motivation to them. They're eating crackers as if they owned the place. And that is how Donald Trump supporters feel about most Americans. The media, the Joe Biden voters, even media that they ostensibly support, like Fox News, they will they're so primed to hate readily and easily that they turned on Fox for reporting that Donald Trump lost the election and for reporting at least a bit on the insurrection. Molly put in some emojis, and I'm going to try and see what they are. What is that emoji? Is it an otter? It looks white. Maybe it's a snowman. Maybe I can see it better on my phone. I'm just curious. Let's see what they are. I can't tell. Maybe Molly will tell me. Oh, bunnies. Bunnies applauding. Thank you, Molly. Thank you for the bunnies applauding. I appreciate that. Particularly because I know my singing is not always on pitch. I didn't do any warm-up. I'm not following the rules of performance. Particularly also, this is a political broadcast and it sometimes feels incongruous for me to sing. But then I know this small audience of loyalists tend to be the people who, for whatever reason, enjoy my singing. So that was for all you all. Would you like another one? We could do, I have 2 ones from Hamilton that I do because they are aligned with me, with my political goals, which is to mock and expose those people who try to emotionally manipulate a nation or a powerful subset of a nation. And also the other song I sing, Dear Theodosia, is a celebration of people who see themselves as custodians of a nation and embolden themselves by considering their children and the type of world that will be left for their children. And even for those without children, anyone who can think in a responsible way about the present and the future, those are people on my team. People who behave with decency and don't just center their own patriotism. I want Donald Trump supporters to have health care and access to the vote. I believe that when everyone has easy, unobstructed access to voting that is eligible to vote, that Democrats are more likely to win a majority of elected offices. But at the same time, I also know the power and pervasiveness of right-wing created media bubbles that are very exclusive, that have a strong tendency to exclude the truth and to favor distorted presentations of reality, that fearmonger about artificial threats, fabricated threats, overinflated, overhyped threats. And so before I go, I might even play a video that I possibly saved to my bookmarks or just retweeted this morning. I'll find it. Did I save it? And I'm enjoying that a lot of people are talking about the January 6th hearing. No. Did I bookmark it? I bookmarked Hope Hicks's comments, so I will go back and look at that. I bookmarked a clip of a defiant Catholic priest who was defrocked by the Vatican. He took an aborted fetus into church. All right, what if I search? It was someone who did a very good summary. They extracted 60 seconds worth of Tucker Carlson. And I know people don't enjoy hearing the propaganda, but with that appropriate framing, the fact that it's so condensed, you're not experiencing the persuasive force of an extended Tucker Carlson argument. You're just viewing these little snippets and getting to experience the endpoints of his arguments. So I'm going to share that on StreamYard. It's 56 seconds, but I think it's worthwhile. I used to have followers who would leave the broadcast if I ever did this, shared something from a Fox broadcast. But I still persisted with my own view of it, which is that we need to be aware, and that ignoring the reality of Fox and its brainwashing influence on us, a politically potent section of the American voting public, then we're not properly arming ourselves rhetorically and philosophically speaking to be able to combat their arguments and their fabricated threat mongering.
All these nations preparing for World War Trans, they would like to see World
War Trans. So as always, amplification of a confected threat. So trans people do not comprise the bulk of, or are not disproportionately represented, are not overrepresented in the statistics of people who abuse children. People overrepresented in those statistics are people with unquestioned authority within communities. So people with power over children and the power to compel the silence of victims. So the power to take advantage of the fact that for assault charges to stick, you typically need witnesses and evidence. So people who can privately have one-on-one time with children and abuse them are overrepresented in the statistics of people and professionals who do that. So pretending that trans people pose a threat to children, that's a deceit that necessarily implies bad intent towards children, that the very existence of a trans person is a threat to children and a threat to the fabric of society. That is a very fascist style false presentation of a marginalized group of people in order to present them as the threat and hate monger about them. Hate mongering is the word I use, because they'll tell you that they're not afraid. They're not afraid, they're just angry, and they want to have legislation that will harass trans people. They want to have legislation that will exclude trans people, and they're prepared to act in that direction themselves. They're prepared to take private action to harass, offend, exclude, and harm people who are gender fluid.
War Trans will not be able to have children in another 50 years. If it steals your sex drive, maybe it's stealing your soul. No one really believes in global warming. Misinformation can be true. Any American who disapproves of Joe Biden's performance is a terrorist.
See, look, he's always winding up his audience to say, they're calling you a racist, they're calling you a terrorist, always to make the audience feel attacked and defensive and angry and that much more primed to hate and to take action to manifest that hate in the world, to see the people they don't support as enemies who are presently engaged in attacking them.
You're a terrorist. You're a stochastic terrorist. You are guilty of stochastic terrorism. What a terrorist. You're a dangerous racist. You're a racist. You're a racist. You're a racist.
Look at these different shirt tie combinations just to show you that clip is not just being replayed 3 times. That's 3 different occasions in which Tucker Carlson is using almost hypnotically the same cadence, the same delivery to trigger that same emotional response, using the emotional hierarchy of sarcasm. Sarcasm says, I'm denigrating somebody else. I'm representing their argument as stupid. Oh, you're so clever. Wow, apparently you're a racist. So the people he's mocking, he's parroting, the people making those accusations. He is a racist, and he's encouraging his viewers to be racist and to adopt racist positions, but also they're encouraging them to compound that racism with hatred towards the people accusing them of racism, so that to take advantage of their own lack of self-awareness, if they are covert racists, if they're like, I'm not a racist, I support Black people, I have a Black friend, but they oppose, say, taxation because they believe welfare benefits will, benefit people who don't deserve it. And whether they understand it or not, in their mind, they've conflated Black with undeserving and white with authentic, deserving, good people. And they click on videos that tell them, that reinforce their pre-existing prejudices, that reinforce and expand their existing prejudices. Reinforce and expand. Yes, that is what Tucker Carlson's doing. I'm just writing it down. All right. Always a lot to unpack. And he also said, oh, nobody believes in climate change, to make them feel like they're tapped into the consensus amongst law-abiding, decent, sensible people. Of course, everyone believes, everyone doesn't believe in climate change. And if you do, you're outside of the norm. You're worthy of disdain. You're part of a cult. It's a complete reversal of reality where a significant majority, 99% of climate scientists endorse the idea of man-made anthropogenic climate change induced by the massive contribution of human activities to heat trapping gases in the atmosphere that allow the sun's rays to pass through to Earth, to warm that Earth, and then provide a layer that reduces the escape of some of that heat. So a heat trapping layer that over time incrementally builds up the temperature of the Earth towards a future that is incompatible with human existence, that is deleterious to human agriculture, to our ability to feed ourselves as communities, as nations, as families. People finding it harder to buy food, people finding it harder to grow food and supply others as a consequence of politically under-addressed climate change issues, because political activity in this department has been obstructed and continues to be obstructed by the wealthy elite with a vested interest in selling and profiting from fossil fuels. And that's where we are. And that's why our children are in danger and continue to be in danger, because even as much as we've elected Joe Biden, or American voters have elected Joe Biden, a majority of American voters have elected Joe Biden, and they've made important changes. And the Inflation Reduction Act does a lot to support renewable energies and make changes to make America a more energy efficient nation. Oh, energy efficiency is such a good term. We should use that a lot more. Energy efficient nation. It's still being sabotaged. Yes. By one of the chief profiteers from fossil fuels, which is Vladimir Putin, who has his finger in the pie of all Russian oil and gas sales.
Just if you notice, because you're a racist. This is a jihad, and they're coming for you. There is a strong political component to the Democratic Party's immigration policy. We're not guessing this. It's their electoral.
See, this is lies. They're accusing Democrats of being of acting with human decency towards refugees and asylum seekers and migrants, because it's all a plot, a scheme, and misrepresenting American decency as being a scheme to enroll voters who aren't eligible to vote. Because it takes a lot to be eligible to vote. You don't just have to be present in America. To be on the electoral roll, you have to have a lot of documentation to prove that you've lived here for a substantial period of time and that you qualify for the conditions that allow you to vote.
Moral strategy. These are not the people you would import if you cared about.
So racist denigration of migrants. So what is he used in that picture? They're behind barbed wire so you can associate them as a threat. I mean, that's children. There's children in that picture, but he's using that picture as a background to say these are people, these are terrible people.
About your country, graffiti artists, armed robbers, and subway rapists. They will change the electorate. Race war. That's what the collapse of civilization looks like. Oh, you're trafficking in misinformation. You're a conspiracy nut.
I listen to his efforts to be so comedic in his disdain for the left's very accurate characterization of his show as stochastic terrorism and willful hate mongering.
You're a racist. Yeah. Okay. Got that, you degraded freaks. All these nations.
Got that, you degraded freaks? You're a racist. Okay. Yeah. He knows he's a racist, but his bread and butter lies in exploiting people's inability to accept and work with their own racism. So I accept that I've grown up in a culture marinated in racist ideas and racist practices, and that things which feel like the status quo to me, if I haven't examined them, if I haven't been introduced to competing ideas, I will accept things that actually are harmful to people of color. And that without individually unpacking all of this stuff, it will take me time over my life to learn different ways of behaving and thinking, so that I can unpack some of the anti-Blackness and anti-pluralistic society ideas that I've been exposed to unconsciously. And I process my feelings about that, because the failure to process your feelings and the failure to acknowledge the high levels of institutional racism, the inertia of prejudiced policies and standards and procedures. The failure to understand the history of that is and process the guilt leads people to have these defensive reactions where their denialism about their own nation, their own history, and the live history of the racist banning of certain history books that deal too honestly with some of these problems for racists to sit comfortably with. The banning of books in a lot of southern states, the antagonism towards critical race theory that again is the subject of significant hate mongering by Republican strategists who seek to consolidate power in the Republican Party. And if you understand correctly that the Republican Party is a front group for the wealthy elite, the self-interested wealthy elite, then you will understand how they continue. You will understand how and why they continue to hate monger and fabricate threats and try to whip up hate against a shifting panoply of marginalized people. All right. So we watched Tucker Carlson. I'm going to share that video right now and say it's a good idea to keep an eye on. Their powerful strategies of hate mongering in order to maintain and expand power amongst a certain wealthy and self-interested elite. Yeah, narcissistic capitalism, where you think only I have the solution, only I should be involved in sending humanity to Mars, like Elon Musk saying I should control Twitter, and only I am sufficiently wise enough to understand that you must restore Nazis to the platform in order to have the purity of freeness of speech. You also have people now claiming to be purebloods because they're not vaccinated. There's a very recognizable return and escalation of this pure rhetoric. The pureness of free speech. Oh, Christopher, you might be back. I might do my second song in your honor. Yes, white heterosexual men are the biggest number of child molesters. I don't know if it's disproportionate, but it could be. I haven't analyzed or seen an analysis of the data. The Texas Attorney General is such a prime example of people hate mongering in order to consolidate their own power and to consolidate their own freedom from legal consequence, their own ability to commit crimes with impunity. Because Texan Attorney General Ken Paxton has been under indictment for 7 years. So he's been investigated for committing crimes. Some of his colleagues and associates became whistleblowers pushed through the fear of turning people in and reported his actions to the authorities. So he's been under investigation for 7 years, under indictment. Nothing has been done at this point to resolve this, to have him officially be charged and go through a court trial and potentially be convicted of corruption and crimes. Why? Because he's a Republican in Texas and he's Attorney General. I don't understand the holdup personally. I don't understand why somebody with so much implied criminality is allowed to be in that position of power, to try to scapegoat others, marginalize and vulnerable other people, to take attention away from himself, to falsely position himself as a warrior for Christianity and a warrior for this social fabric, and particularly by his recent actions in trying to get a list of trans people in Texas. Who did he ask? Did he ask the driving registry for people who were registered on their driver's license as having changed gender? Christopher's happy that I'm going to sing again. This is good. I'm going to sing Dear Theodosia. I sang You'll Be Back. It took me a little while because I was thinking I should rewrite the lyrics, but I didn't have time to do that. All right. Play it. It's an ad festival. Two ads. Okay. Dear Theodosia, what to say to you? You have my eyes, you have your mother's name. When you came into the world, you cried, and it broke my heart. I'm dedicating every day to you. Domestic life was never quite my style. When you smile, you knock me out, I fall apart, and I thought I was so smart. You will come of age with our young nation. We'll bleed and fight for you. We'll make it right for you. If we lay a strong enough foundation, we'll pass it on to you. We'll give the world to you. You'll blow us all away. Someday, someday. Yeah, you'll blow us all away. Someday, someday. Ooh, Philip, when you smile, I am undone. My son, look at my son. Pride is not the word I'm looking for. There is so much more inside me now. Ooh, Philip, you outshine the morning sun. My son, when you smile, I fall apart, and I thought I was so smart. My father wasn't around, but I'll be around for you. Do whatever it takes. I'll make a million mistakes, make the world safe and sound for you. We'll come of age with our young nation. We'll bleed and fight for you. We'll make it right for you. If we lay a strong enough foundation, we'll pass it on to you. We'll build the world for you. Blow us all away. Someday, someday. Yeah, you'll blow us all away. Someday, someday. There you go. That's Dear Theodosia. I'm going back to Bob's commentary now, and he was saying that the picture of Jared Kushner and Elon Musk was telling. Indeed, it was. The Saudis wouldn't let them sit. Did they not have seats? Perhaps they preferred to stand, but it also could be that that was a specific power differential created by the Saudis to say you owe us. And indeed, the Saudis are probably possibly displeased with Elon Musk. They could quite possibly be very pleased with how he is destroying Twitter, degrading and eroding Twitter as a pro-democracy platform that has been very consequential in world politics. And certainly the activism and pro-democracy gathering of like-minded people on Twitter was a powerful engine of activity to galvanize the vote against Trump and for Biden. Twitter was a powerful center for people to exchange ideas and the words to condemn Trump when the mainstream media was often failing to acknowledge his pattern of lying. They would not call Donald Trump a liar for a long time. And it was people on Twitter writing to journalists, communicating specifically with people in power and calling them to account and saying, why won't you call his lies lies? They are consequential lies. They are lies that will harm the American public. Why aren't you using words accurately and fairly? Why do you hide behind a false equivalence of, oh, well, we can't accuse a Democratic president of lying right now, so we'll just tone down the words we use to describe Donald Trump's very fascist, very concerning pattern of extraordinary deception. And it was the people on Twitter who celebrated Canadian reporter Daniel Dale for using the word lie in reference to Trump and cataloging his lies and reporting accurately on his lies on a frequent basis. So that Daniel Dale was eventually poached from the Toronto Star in Canada to CNN. That was just one move showing the power of Twitter to counteract that normalization process that was taking place, that was helping normalize an aspiring despot. The fascist trajectory of Donald Trump was disrupted by Twitter. And no doubt that has given the Saudis powerful motivation to disrupt that media platform so that their anti-democratic hold on the Saudi Arabian people is not similarly disrupted. Christopher enjoyed my singing. Thank you. Twitter and TikTok is where Bob gets most of his news. I know because you often send me excellent TikTok clips of people presenting elements of the news and history that I haven't heard before, and they're often extremely potent and powerful. And I'm glad that that resource exists, even though I do think the Chinese government likely has a strong hold over the creation and the owners and the use of TikTok so that they can potentially harvest your data. Look, good luck. There's a lot of users of TikTok, so it may be good luck, Chinese government. I wish you didn't own TikTok, but you do, and its current way of operating, it can be a powerful pro-democracy tool for disseminating educational content to the young, and the young need that. It was definitely Gen Z who had a potent impact at the polling booth, these midterm elections, particularly young women who I guess heard a more full story about the threats to reproductive justice, the threats to their own ability to choose when to have children, to say no to pregnancies that were a result of coercion or rape or manipulation, or didn't cohere with their personal financial and emotional and psychological circumstances, and to even get appropriate medical care in the event of a medical complication of a wanted pregnancy. There's a woman, and I'll find the video, there is a woman who posted her how she was in a hospital and getting Maybe it's in my bookmarks. Have a look. Oh my gosh, Elon Musk deleted a tweet. But earlier on December the 16th was attempting to justify his actions in kicking a whole bunch of journalists off Twitter because they were reporting on his kicking off the Elon Jet account, and also doing some reporting around the circumstances whereby he claimed that he was stalked. In fact, the Washington Post has now run an article saying that they looked at the geolocation, or a Bellingcat volunteer looked at the geolocation of a video that Musk had posted of a man in a balaclava, and found that that was a day after any movements from Elon Musk's jet and wasn't any location near an airport. And actually seems to have been a young man obsessed with Elon Musk's ex-wife. So yes, that does involve his children if she was transporting his child at the time, but it doesn't appear that his child was involved. And certainly it was a mischaracterization to say that Elon Musk's jet account, which is an account, sorry, it's called Elon Jet. And it was some young teenager who was initially a fan of Elon Musk, who took scraped the publicly available data of his jet movements and put them on a Twitter account. And Elon Musk had announced that he was so committed to free speech that he would continue to allow that account online. And then the day after his security guard's encounter with a potential stalker of his ex-wife, just used that as an opportunity to get rid of a lot of journalists who were criticizing him. And even though their suspension was temporary, and he's now, after a lot of criticism as well, restored their accounts, it's still got a chilling effect potentially on journalists whose livelihood is dependent on maintaining the audiences that they've built up on Twitter. It's to say, look, if you report in a way that displeases Elon Musk, he's not running Twitter as a rule-governed organization. He's running Twitter on his personal whims. So if you displease him, if you report too much on the fall of Tesla stock potentially, or that he wasn't actually personally the victim of a stalking effort, or his child wasn't victimized by stalking, or that the alleged stalking had no bearing on the movements of his jet. Bob is saying there's one country sanctioning Musk potentially, that they will tax every one of his holdings worldwide. Could be Ireland. Europe has some anti-competition rules, has some anti-monopoly rules that stops you from banning, or that fines you significantly if you ban competitors from your gatekeeper platforms. If you have a gatekeeper platform like Twitter, then you should not be doing things like saying you can't include a link to your Linktree website, your Instagram account. Notably, when the new Twitter terms were listing, banned other platforms that you couldn't link to on Twitter. He included Truth Social, but they didn't include the other right-wing platforms, Getter, Parler, etc. They said Instagram, Facebook, Mastodon, Truth Social, Post, I think. Yes, it might have been the EU. All right. Well, I'm going to put the screen back on. This is how I can do it. No. Let's watch just that isolated bit of Hope Hicks' consequential testimony today, because it's just indicative of former allies turning on Trump. That cumulatively, he has blotted his copybook to a significant extent with supporters of the Republican Party through contributing to their loss in the 2018 midterms, the loss of the presidential election in 2020, and the loss of a Senate majority in 2022 this year. Donald Trump's support for various Senate candidates appears to have been a contributing factor in those candidates losing. Their endorsement of Donald Trump's lies repelled some moderate Republican voters who potentially either voted for Democrats or just failed to endorse the Trumpy Senate candidates. Here on a scale that would have impacted the outcome of the election, and I was becoming going back to this. Fraud on a scale that would have impacted the outcome of the election, and I was becoming increasingly concerned that we were damaging his legacy.
What did the president say in response to what you just described?
He said something along the lines of, nobody will care about my legacy if I lose. So that won't matter.
This is a powerful contribution to a legal case because you have to have established not only bad actions, but you also have to establish guilty intent, mens rea. And that is motive. Motive goes to mens rea, motive of it will destroy his legacy if he loses. She's like, you'll destroy your legacy by your actions to incite a coup. And he's like, no, because if I don't incite a coup, then I don't have a legacy because I will have lost. So I have to overthrow, I have to overturn Joe Biden's election win because otherwise everything I've done is invalidated. And a decent person wouldn't say that. They wouldn't say my turn in office as a president is all invalidated if I lose. They would say I was president and I lost. And this company holds the peaceful transfer of power sacred as part of their pride in their strong democracy. That is an example to other countries around the world where an individual's ego might determine what happens to their country and their political systems because they don't have safeguards that are as strong as ours, that are as uniformly maintained as ours. That in America, we have a significant number of people committed to the upholding of a strong democracy. That is a point of pride for a large number of Americans. And you can see that the hate mongering has helped detach a large number of Republican voters from that. So you still get people voting for candidate Kari Lake or Blake Masters or JD Vance, people who endorse and promote Donald Trump's lies about the actuality of Biden's election win. And they promote those lies because those lies help them consolidate power and win the support of Trump-centric Republican voters. But politics is a margins game, and enough of a significant margin of voters rejected that. And that's why Kari Lake lost her run for governor of Arizona. That's why Blake Masters lost his run for Senate, a position in the Senate. JD Vance did win, but by a relatively slender margin. And he had a lot of funding from narcissistic, self-centered billionaire, vulture capitalist Peter Thiel. Yes. So, all right, I've been on the internet for a long time, so I'm going to get off and say thank you to all those who have been at the watch party with me today. I don't know if there are any Trump comments yet. He's probably on Truth Social. What if I Google? What if I do a Twitter search for Trump and see, and then we'll go. Oh, and Aaron Rupar, one of the left's favorite journalists who often includes video clips of Republican events or he reports on the worst of Republican behavior. And Elon Musk banned him. And he's now written a situation that initially appeared to be a huge bummer for me, turned out to be a positive. Thank you so much to my wonderful followers for that. But the bigger picture is Twitter's transformation into a petty dictatorship. So yes, that is very important, because of the chilling effect. Even if his own account has been restored, I'm glad that he still feels comfortable in saying that, in calling out Elon Musk, even though he doesn't mention him for name, but he calls out what his effects go to achieving, which is the transformation of Twitter into a petty dictatorship. Wow, he's tweeted the whole 12-minute video that the January 6th committee put together summarizing key evidence. That would be a great one to send to relatives, to fence-sitting, Republican-leaning voters who need to be. Oh wow, the January 6th committee got an ovation after Thompson adjourns its final meeting. We are proud of them. Oh, I missed this bit. I was probably texting my children's teachers at that point when I realized I'd forgotten to email them about something. Raskin announces that the January 6th committee is referring 4 House Republicans for sanction by the House Ethics Committee for refusing to comply with subpoenas. The implication is they committed crimes and didn't want to incriminate themselves by answering honestly the questions of the committee, and they didn't feel that they could lie convincingly enough. Just still trying to see if there's any latest comments from Trump. Oh, Mike Pompeo said 3 hours ago that ending Title 42 will be a catastrophe. It's past time for the Biden administration to take this crisis seriously. Mike Pompeo is a bad person who misrepresented the agreement that he signed with the Taliban that allowed for thousands of prisoners to be released back into Afghanistan from prisons, allowing the Taliban to have a resurgent leadership. And also that Trump withdrew 5,000 soldiers from Afghanistan before Biden elected to comply with the rest of that agreement and entirely withdraw American troops. So Mike Pompeo put America in a weaker position in Afghanistan through his own actions when Trump was in office. People are signing petitions asking the Department of Justice to act on the criminal referral for Donald Trump. Yes. Was it 5,000 prisoners released yet? That makes sense. I did watch a bit of Carrie Lake last night, saying that she identifies as a proud election-denying deplorable, and her pronouns are I won. So they're really leaning into that whole Trump antagonism of people who are choosing their pronouns, being flexible about pronouns and how they apply. If you're not trans and if you don't have any desire to be flexible about your gender, and if you are a hearty supporter of status quo and don't rock the boat unless it's necessary, then maybe you will feel personally antagonized by people choosing their pronouns rather than their pronouns being something that immutably applies to them from birth. That might feel weird to you, like a loss of power, and having candidates like Carrie Lake and Trump and others hit back at the existence of trans people might make you feel empowered. That's how fascism works. Makes you feel empowered in the face of change or loss or defeat. So just as many Germans felt keenly the loss of World War I and felt antagonized by being required to pay reparations to other countries, Hitler was able to build power by building on the conflict between people's perceptions that Germany should not suffer defeat, that Germany was too strong to suffer loss, and provided them an empowering alternate version of reality in which they were strong, but the Jews sold them out. They are strong, but you can feel empowered by punching down and having legislation against those who you feel hate for. Using that rush of power that you get from hate and acting on hate. That's what fascism is. It's empowering, attracting, building support, building political support for yourself by empowering people through cultivating hate. Hate against minorities, against a shifting series of targeted minorities. Okay. Well, I already said I was going to go a little while ago, but now I'm following through. Take care, everybody. Thank you, Bob and Molly and Christopher. And who else did we have today? In the comment section, we also had MD Hewitt and Lion of Judea. Thank you to everybody who participated in the comment section. Thank you to all those who watched, and thank you to any replay viewers. Take care. Have a wonderful day. And let's hope that Jack Smith, the newly appointed special counsel, will feel motivated and is already on the path to hand out those much richly deserved indictments of Donald Trump, and to pursue additional indictments as well of sitting congressional members who were allies and co-conspirators of Donald Trump in his efforts to overturn the American system of democracy that has stood strong for a long period of time. The Capitol hasn't been attacked since, 1812, when the British sacked the Capitol building. Was it 1812? Anyway, I've got to go, but take care. Oh, there's some new comments. Bob says, say hi to Mr. Dav. Will do. Molly says, thank you. Christopher says, thank you. And Bob says he's looking forward to a Trump perp walk. Wouldn't that be something? I in equal measures look forward to it and fear it, because I fear for the people who will be potentially innocent victims of the retaliatory violence from deluded Trump supporters and cultists and co-conspirators who don't believe Trump's lies, but who believe in their utility value as tools of power consolidation, like Roger Stone and Rudy Giuliani. Good luck, American justice system. Good luck, Americans. Yes, and I will also note, as Lawrence Scribe did the other day, that it's effing disgusting that the principal cause of death amongst American children aged 1 to 18 is gun violence. And I was pleased that a constitutional scholar of his reputation would foreground that circumstance by tweeting that with an emphatic swear word, as he did. It's an effing disgrace that children in this nation have as the leading cause of death violence that is facilitated by American gun culture, violence that is facilitated by Republican willful obstruction of measures to improve that level of gun proliferation, willful Republican obstructionism and impotence, and flat out pandering to the National Rifle Association, which cheerfully steps on the bodies of children in their efforts to advance the ability of gun manufacturers to profiteer on the back of paranoid gun fetish behavior. That's my concluding statement for the day. Take care, everyone, and talk to you soon. Bye.